I did. Welcome everyone to the Pom and LekDog off-season review, where we go through 12 teams, one of which being our own, assessing what they've done, where they are, and what the fuck they can do to be as good as Carlton. I'm Pom. The other half of me is LekDog. LekDog, how you doing?
I'm well, mate. I'm excited. I love the off-season stuff. It took us a while to ramp up and get involved because obviously the Blues were still playing until last week. And I'm excited to do the remaining 12 sides. So if you follow someone, a club that finished Richmond or below, you're going to have to, after this, go back and watch last week's video. But from Geelong onwards, we're covering them all this week.
We are indeed. I'm gutted that we're not doing the grand final teams. That's in another world. Me and LekDog are here with the team picking a grand final, but
imagine.
We're not. But
it's all right.
But shout out to Chrissy M, who's just become a member. Welcome aboard, my friend. Christian J Pomdog. Hey, if we ever become a duet, that could be it. The Pomdogs. Evening, Rowan. Lockie's shattered. We were so close to the sequel. Kate,
we were so close.
Dr. Doofenshmirtz. We were nearly close. And he's got the cricket on. Hopefully, we're
the funny thing, Pom.
Yeah.
I was sitting at Icon Park watching the game, and I wasn't thinking, "Gee whiz, we're going to get into the grand final." I was thinking, "Fuck, I'm going to have to do a rap."
I've got to say, when I had my halftime cigarette break, I started coming up with bars. I was like, fuck, gotta help Blackout here. Gotta help. We are on Geelong, who are the masters, the manipulators of the AFL rules. Obviously, last year, LekDog, they were quite active, weren't they? And we were quite critical of them because they managed to somehow snag a best 22 player in Jack Bowes and Jai Clark, who had already trained with Geelong for pretty much most of his draft year. I'm not suggesting Chris Scott's a liar when he talks about this draft manipulation going on, but I would imagine he's an expert of draft manipulation, given the comments. But 12th this year, 7 and 82. Ironically, 7's back. 6 changes so far, 5 changes. This is the oldest AFL list in the league by quite a bit as well. 0.2 years in the grand scheme of things is a fucking lot. The most experienced. Obviously, we've got down age profile and also midfield and ruck, because I don't know if you can keep being an official AFL side with Reece Stanley as a ruck. But LekDog, your thoughts on Geelong, and chat. Tell us what you think about the former reign. Well, they are the reigning premiers until 4 days.
4 more days of being the reigning premiers. This is the lowest they've ever finished on the ladder. So they've finished last before, but that was when 12 teams were in the league. So it's pretty amazing stuff from them. Last year, bought in Jack Bowes and picked 7. Wasn't critical of them per se, because I was critical of the AFL because prior to Gold Coast needing to dump Jack Bowes' salary dumping wasn't allowed. And then Geelong allowed to flatten his contract over 4 years, which defeats the whole purpose of taking on the salary. Anyway, they bring in Bowes and Clark, which is a huge win. They brought in Tanner Bruin, who showed some signs. Ollie Henry, you'd have to say, is a win, just given their key position depth. Ted Closey, Phoenix Foster, Mullen, Murdoch, Riccardi. Nothing else really amazing there. And out went a bunch of guys like Dalhouse, Higgins, Selwood. They lost a fair bit, but they sort of thought that they might be able to live without that experience in the side, but it's shown this year that they probably struggled. And so far this offseason, they've sent out John Segler, Sam Menegola, Oscar Riccardi, who they got last year, Sam Simpson, Isaac Smith has retired, and Cooper White. So a few players to look at who are out of contract, Pom, that have already requested to trade. One of them, Asava Radigalia. The others are Flynn Kroger, Mitch Hardy, Oscar Murdoch, and Reece Stanley. 3 of those you'd think don't really factor into this list build. And as a result, you nailed it. They're looking for mid-age players. They've got, I think, 1 player aged between 23 and 27 right now. They need some quality mids. They need a ruckman because they've just kind of patch jobbed that for the last few years. And I reckon they probably need key forward depth, because I predict there's another world where a few less players retire and then like a Tom Hawkins has to retire. So I think he's only going on because they probably don't have many other options. So I'm interested to see who you think they should go for, Pom. And like, it's their worst. It's literally the lowest they've ever finished on the ladder. So you have to say it was a bad year for them. I don't know how to project their future because they always seem to find a way to get players in.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, when you look at Geelong's list, right, it's a little bit like if they ever released the attendees of Epstein Island, right? Half of them are really old and half of them are really young, but there's no one in the fucking middle to make it okay. Yeah. That might be, just so you know, let's bookmark that. 27th of September, 7:06. The best analogy I have ever hit. I don't think if I do this for another 50 years, I won't come up with a better one.
No, that's brilliant. I mean, you look at their list. You're right, though. They've got 35-year-old Tom Hawkins, 34-year-old Zach Toohey, 34-year-old Patrick Dangerfield, 33, Reece Stanley, Mark Blitzarves, Gary Rowan, Mitch Duncan. The list goes on. And yeah, they've literally they've got no mid-age players. They've got Ryan Myers, Tyson Stengel, who are 24 and 24. Like, it's kind of rough. And then they've got Radigalea, who wants to leave.
Shout out to Greg as well, who sent me an alcoholic care package today. I'm looking forward to tucking into a bit of Pavlova gin with Mrs. Pom this evening. I did nearly become a Geelong fan. In another world, I would have been a Geelong fan. But, I mean, we've got here, the rumours are Bailey Smith is the big link. And you mentioned it there yourself, Lek. They have an uncanny knack of bringing players over, don't they? Like, you see pick 7 and 82, but in reality, you know they're going to find some ridiculous way to turn 7 into 5, 9, 14, and a future first, and somehow get the 3 best Geelong Falcons in this draft and Bailey Smith and still stay under the salary cap. I mean, Bailey Smith, obviously, I think suits what they need. I do think they do lack a dynamic mid. I think Joel Selwood being missing is a massive issue. You saw that Tanner Braun and Atkin did do that job to pretty much good effect, but I do think they need some babies. They do need some babies around there and try and fix it up. But outside of Bailey Smith, right, who they've been linked with, what is out there for them picks? Because you'd say 7 needs to go to the draft, doesn't it?
You'd think so. And you've got Simpson there. I've heard Riley Sanders is someone they're interested in. Obviously, the AFL is going to end up finding his home at North. Just a couple of names, and these aren't young guys, but a couple of names that I've listed. Bailey Smith, Ivan Soldo, who seems unlikely, but he would provide that ruckman. Riley Bonner as a delisted free agent. Tom Doedee, like they might find their way into just getting the best free agent available, which at the moment I think is Tom Doedee. But here's my hot take, Pom, and I've not released this to anyone yet. This is happening live. I've just got this sick feeling we're going to wake up next year and Jack McRae is going to be on this team. He's not exactly what they need in terms of age, but he's probably what they need in terms of player. And it's the sort of rubbish that they seem to pull off every year. So Jack McRae is my secret player to go to Geelong. What about the young guys? Who you got them looking at?
I'm just give a shout out to Sandy, who was gifted 10 memberships to the chat at the moment. So thank you very much, Sandy. He's a long-time fan, Sandy Falcone. So thank you very much. I mean, as for kids, I mean, they've got pick 7. Now, I can see a world, because obviously that is where Riley Sanders is expected. He's somewhere between 5 and maybe earlier now, North have been given all the picks at the start of this draft. I mean, they have got a great success with going to Geelong Falcons, and this is probably the year that they probably are happy that it's this year and the picks they've got, because the Geelong Falcons guys are way down the draft. So they could be an argument here that where their next pick is, that is around where the Geelong boys are. So they're in the 50s, 60s. So they could look at a future system and send that in a package. As for, I put Cooper Simpson. I think he is the ideal Geelong, I'm ready to go now. Now, he's scheduled to go in the second round. I've predicted they probably on trade 7 because they have been linked with Sanders. There's no chance on God's green earth he's going there. I reckon, aside from that, they may choose to drop down the draft into that mid-second, late, early third, and maybe try and bolster it. So there is players like Logan Morris, who I look at their forward stocks and think they probably need someone to replace Hawkins in the next couple of years and have that reliability. There is players like Will Green, who is a ruck forward, who is very similar to Rhys Stanley. So I look and think they could do that. But Cooper Simpson, captain of his juniors, I did an interview with him. He actually went into coaching because he's been out for most of the year. So actually went in and coaching. And that's the kind of people that they like to have. Do you know what I mean? They like them leaders and stuff like that. Jay Clark, heavily involved in the leadership group. I think that would probably be a good little return. But I agree. Some people in the chat saying, is it rebuild time? I think they've got to have a look. And I think Hasty,
very good point here.
They need to do this quickly because they've got 2 years. And we've seen it with the compromise draft next year with North. You need to get this done today.
Yeah, and this doesn't just apply to Geelong. You don't want to be the team that draws the rebuild card the year that Tassie come in. I think partially that's why the AFL are helping North out so much. They want them away from Tassie by the time Tassie come around, and I think that's why we'll see Gold Coast and expansion clubs continue to have some concessions because it's going to be really, really difficult, impossible to rebuild when expansion teams are around. And we sort of saw that at the Blues. It wasn't a direct result, but it certainly didn't help the situation trying to rebuild when those clubs were dominating when they were starting. So a great point from Hasty, and that doesn't just apply to Geelong. It applies to every club that might be staring down a drop-off. So for Geelong, they need to act now or somehow get back into contention next year.
Question without notice for chat and you, LekDog. Is this the year that Geelong bite the bullet and go, look, the Premiership window is probably ajar if they get a couple of young talents in now to help? Is it chance, though, they maybe look at becoming the feeders for teams that are maybe 4 to 12 who are looking for that mature Premiership experience and doing like Collingwood did with Treloar and players like that? Maybe jettisoning some of their over 30s for picks to try and help a Premiership push. Players I'm looking at here are like Blitzarbs, who we know is really versatile and probably fits 17 AFL systems. Players like Mitch Duncan, who we know is incredibly versatile. Cam Guthrie. Do you know what I mean? I can't see them getting rid of Tom Stewart and Jeremy Cameron. They're superstars. But players around that age, them over 30s, to try and boost the AFL. Like, what I find interesting, a lot of teams looking who we're going to talk about today, key forwards. Tom Hawkins isn't getting any younger. Probably is worth a second, maybe even a first, for a team that's looking for a real Premiership tilt this year coming. Is it maybe time for them to put these guys up and say, do you want it?
I don't think Tom Hawkins would put him up. I think he'd rather retire than move. But imagine him going to Melbourne for a year. I think he's the sort of puzzle that would fit a piece that would fit that puzzle. I think the guys I would expect to be looking at new homes that they might get something for are your Rhys Stanleys, your Mark Blitzarves, your Mitch Duncans. I think you kind of nailed it. I think the rest are either too important to their culture or, not good enough to bring much to the table. But for sure, I definitely think we'll see at least one of these 30-plus-year-old guys find a new home, just see what they're worth.
Greg asked, this has been a big link. We are coming up to Collingwood, but we'll answer it anyway. Goldstein has been linked with her. Do you think that that's maybe as a backup for Cameron, but also to help develop their young rooks? They have got some young players on their list. Collingwood will come to them more in depth, but I find them a real fascinating case because they have got players like Oscar Steen. Aidan Begg, these young guys that are on their list, but also very underdeveloped, that Goldstein would come in straight away and set a standard and maybe help get their bottom end up very quickly.
Yeah, I think it's the same reason, and we'll probably talk about him with the next team, Essendon. I think it's the same reason they want him. And if you're offering him a leadership role followed by a coaching opportunity, and you choose him between Essendon and Collingwood, you're probably going to pick Collingwood as a guy who's been in he's been in some okay teams, but never been really a premiership contender in his whole career. So I think it's just a depth and development thing. Like, instead of Mason Cox being your backup, you bring in Todd Goldstein. You're probably going to be better off. I don't think that's crazy to say, but yeah, I think looking at their depth as well in the ruck, Collingwood, which we'll talk about when we get to them, they don't actually have heaps of depth. It's kind of like Darcy Cameron, Mason Cox, and then those really raw guys. So I think it makes sense to me. And if I was him, I'd choose Collingwood over Essendon for sure.
Sandy, he agrees. Strong transition plan. This is a really interesting one. He says here, successful campaigns are reluctant to do it because of their because of the standard they've set. Real interesting, I think, here that Geelong probably have to bite the bullet with Tasmania coming in. They have to say, look, it might get worse this year, 2024, but when 2026, when Tasmania are in, at least we're not in a shit heap trying to rebuild with pick 86 as our first pick.
Which ironically is their second pick this year, or just about. Do we want to talk Essendon? I think we've chewed the fat on Geelong.
Well, I mean, Essendon are that case, aren't they? They are probably going to be premiership favourites after 2 weeks of pre-season, as is often the case in this league. But they are the second youngest list that we're analysing today, which is quite impressive. You don't think about Essendon as young, but they have got babies. Finished 11th this year. Real good smorgasbord of picks. They probably have the best off-season already. In Dodoro's not going to be there, which probably makes them somewhat more of a threat with good picks coming in. But last year they were very father-sonny. They brought in the young project Lewis Hayes. Not many of their incomings have played. Only Startus is one of the few, and Alwyn Davey Jr. Will Setterfield was that dodgy trade with us. Sam Wiedemann. 5 contracts still to sort out. Key pillars, though, even though they targeted it in last year's draft, Lewis Hayes, for those who watched the draft previews last year, was always going to be 2 or 3 years away. Lots of body work to do. Very good player, though. Ben Mackay is the one that looks set to come in. Also, Jade Gresham, which we'll talk about with that trade. And a running defender we've put down, LekDog. Tell me more about Essendon.
Yeah, I was pretty low on them coming into this year, and I got a bit of feedback on that pre-season, and I think they probably ended up where we sort of thought they were. To me, they're a bit of a middle-of-the-road team. They're young. I don't like the upside in a lot of their talent, and maybe I just hate Essendon, but some of the players you mentioned, they bought in Will Setterfield, which is a huge tick. Lewis Hayes long-term. Owen David Jr. looks good. But Rhett Montgomery, I believe they've already removed him, or he's out of contract.
And
they've already delisted him.
Removed.
Anthony Moncara, and Rhett Montgomery both been removed. Sam Wiedemann's no good. I think we knew that coming in. He kicked a couple goals in the first couple of games, but he was more of a stopgap. And he didn't cost them anything. So I didn't love their off-season last year, but I loved what they did in terms of bringing in Charters, David Jr. and Setterfield. They didn't lose anyone massive to their structure last year because a lot of the players that went out either weren't playing or weren't playing consistently. Aaron Francis is probably the only one who'd still be playing for them if he stayed. And then out of contract, we've got Brandon Zerk-Thatcher, who's requested a trade. We've got Massimo D'Ambrosio, who's requested a trade to Hawthorn. Paddy Voss, Will Snelling. I think Will Snelling they'll sign, and Paddy Voss they'll probably keep around as depth. But I'm with you. They definitely need key position defenders, which they're going for in Ben Mackay. I question the amount they're going to pay him, given his rates elite in one stat in the AFL, intercept marks. But hopefully he can improve in a new environment. They need a backup mature age ruck purely because Andrew Phillips is retiring, which is why they're going after a Todd Goldstein. You can throw in a Scott Lysett there. You can throw in a I don't know, a Matty Flynn. He's not that old, but he's at least been in the system. And the reason is Sam Draper, he's had groin surgery. He's supposed to be their great white hope in the ruck, and he just doesn't play footy. And they probably need X factor and a running defender. And the running defender comes with Nick Hind probably dropping off a bit. Obviously, they haven't had Adam Sard for a few years. And the X factor is, I've put that in there in my notes just because they're chasing Jade Gresham. And I think you're hoping for X factor from Jade Gresham, but I'm not a massive Jade Gresham fan myself. I think, and I don't know if you want to talk about how they're going to try and manipulate the free agency comp, which is within the rules, Pom, but certainly annoys me.
Oh dear, you know what? I'd never stick up for Essendon. Far be it from me. But what I do find really amusing about this is something we have suspected has gone on since the dawn of time. Like, I love it. What I love about the AFL is when something is reported that we've all suspicioned had happened. Great example last year. The money they spent on Richmond got for Ivan Solder, which happened to become the trade when everyone was like, there's no way they can get Taranto and Hopper. And then suddenly, straight away, Chol has been linked with a move away due to salary. I swear it goes on. Do I like it? No. Does it go on until we have a competitive trade window where we have 18 list managers trying to get best deal, not work together for the greater good? It's always going to happen. I think, though, and I think Sandy nails it, with Dodoro there, these are Dodoro deals. Ben Mackay, Gresham, players that we have hoped could be good, but we don't know. And that is what Essendon have done that's been their list strategy for 10 years. Players that might be better than what they've got. They trade out players, which I agree with Ian. I think D'Ambrosia is better than Hind and is the pacey halfback they need. They haven't given him the chance. That is what Essendon have done, and that is why they haven't won a final for so long. They trade out good quality talent, hoping other AFL teams have got it wrong, and ultimately are left with a list, in my opinion, when I look at Essendon, that's really the definition of meh.
Yeah, I always come across as just an Essendon hater because I'm a Carlton fan, but I really don't like their list. I think I'm with you. Meh is the way to do it. And just for those wondering, the loopholing with Jade Gresham, basically, they're going to pay him so much that St Kilda get a really good compo pick, and then St Kilda are going to trade that compo pick back to them for Dylan Shield, which is madness, and no one should be involved in that because why would you want to bring Dylan Shield in? We'll talk about St Kilda later. I think it's going to be a bit more pain for Essendon. I don't think Ben Mackay is going to be the saviour that they need. He'll be better than Brandon Zerk-Thatcher as a key defender, but I think for Ben Mackay to really succeed, he probably needs more help than he does. It's good for Jordan Ridley, if you're talking fantasy, but I don't think it's going to truly help them get to where they want to be, particularly if they're paying him enough to trigger first round compensation. Jade Gresham, I think he's a bit of a downhill skier in my eyes. He's good in winning teams, bad in losing teams, I would suggest. And then you look at their list, the guys that have retired: Anthony McDonald, Tipperwoody, Montgomery, Mankara, Phillips, McBride, Lord, and then they've got Zerk-Thatcher and D'Ambrosio going. That's a lot of gaps to fill, and I'm not sure exactly how they do it because Parrish, Merritt, they're both at the peak of their powers. Peter Wright was shit last year when he came back, but, he was injured all year, so you can't hold him that. Mason Redman, I'd say he's at his peak, but other than that, I don't know where the upside's coming from within the list. Guess Ridley could get better. Maybe McGrath could get better. Nick Martin's really good, but I don't know. I haven't seen enough from your Archie Perkins and your Nick Coxes and those sort of guys to make me really hopeful.
You must have heard of Nick Cox, best winger in the league. I mean, this is it. 800k is a lot of coin. And I don't know how Ben Mackay is worth 800. Maybe they've made a mistake. And LekDog was wrong earlier. He said that he's elite in one category. Maybe they saw the other category he's elite in, having really good brothers, and have mistaken him as the same.
The Chris Mayne, David Mundy situation over at Collingwood.
However, there is hope. There is hope for Essendon when you look at their picks. And we've got Connor O'Sullivan there, who I actually think would be a very good selection. In the ideal world, Ethan Reid, who is probably the 8th best player, if there was no such thing as these fictitious Northern academies where the Northern states can just monopolise good players, they'd probably have it fixed. But there is Nate Caddy or Connor O'Sullivan. Now, Connor O'Sullivan is the perfect by-position player. Very good down back, being very solid up forward. I think that fits what Essendon need. There is another one there that's really interesting, though, in Nate Caddy. And if you look at historically, Ben Scott has played with undersized forwards. So you look at the great Harvey Boomer at North. He had great success playing a guy undersized there. It seems to be the mode of how they're trying to move the ball. I think that could be the logical one. It would break my heart because Nate Caddy, caveat, is my favourite player in this. Connor O'Sullivan straight away fits the bill there. He looks ready to go. He's the perfect size. Loves his intercept. He's a big boy as well, 198, 92 kgs, and runs an impressive 50 metres. So the modern-day backman, big guy. And their later picks as well are really a smorgasbord of trying to find that hidden talent. You've got players like Luau, Jack Deline, who's an outside half-forward type player. Logan Morris is also there, who we've talked about earlier in the show. Good key forward proposition as well. So they've got some really good picks to really add the depth. What about established talent, LekDog? We've got Ben Mackay there. Is there anyone else that they could maybe go to fix today?
Yeah, look, there's no one that jumps to mind really for me that's available that would make sense. I think that what I will say is I think it's a good, they're talking about moving off Dylan Shield, which would allow your Ben Hobbs to establish himself on the side. I think I'm glad that they're in that mind frame of moving on some guys that have, been touted as top end talent, but probably not totally delivered. So for me, it's just, I'd be hitting the draft hard. They already think they're getting Jade Gresham and Ben Mackay. They're two middle-aged players, which will help. So it's Scott Lysett or Todd Goldstein or someone of that caliber for me just to come in and be that backup ruckman, because we saw them. They had to play Phillips with Draper out all year. With what's his name? What's their other ruckman? Nick Bryan. He was unable to ruck through games the whole time on his own. So they need another mature age body just to help him in that space. But for me, go to the draft, get some young guns in. You bring in two established players to your 22, and then you need to hope that it's your Nick Martins and your Hobbs and stuff jump enough. I just think missing a guy like D'Ambrosio is going to really hurt them, because he's probably exactly what they need. But yeah, as we said before, they're really young as well, aren't they? And they'll lose a couple of guys who are over 30 this year, and it'll bring their age down even more. So I think it's just a slow build and almost going to be a soft, I don't want to say soft rebuild or soft reset, but having that changing in the list management department is going to be really big for them, because it might bring them a little bit more into the 21st century, which sadly is going to be a good thing for them.
Very old school list management. I agree. I think Redford Merritt. I'm glad you mentioned Langford. No one mentions him. I think he's incredibly important. Stringer and Draper. I think it'll be interesting. But then we go on to, in my opinion, one of the more exciting lists in the AFL competition, and a team I think have gone quietly about their business as well in the last couple of years. Ever since that grand final, something's happened to them where they've lost their mojo, but it looks like it's back. Last year, they were incredibly active with later picks, having gone hard at adding local talent. Hugh Bond came in, everyone's favourite Tyler Brown, Billy Dowling, Mark Keane, Max McClanahan, and Isaac Rankine was why they had hardly any picks. A real young and exciting list, finished 10th, probably deserved to finish higher if it wasn't for the AFL's corruption with trying to get Sydney in the league. 3 changes still to be decided, but they look like they've done most of their delisting. Defensive depth, really, and probably a point of difference in the midfield is all they're lacking, but a very, very young list. And LekDog, tell me about their list strategy.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, right? I'm really big on Adelaide's list, and every year there's a team outside of the 8 that finds its way into the top 4 or top 6. I can't remember what the stat is. And these would be my pick of the bunch for that. Isaac Rankin was a great pick. Tyler Brown in the preseason supplementary selection period was a bad pick because he's already been delisted. They've delisted Brown, Haitley, Fisher Mackesy has retired, Andrew McPherson delisted, Newchurch delisted, and Seedsman retired out of contract. This is where it hurts them. So they traded Billy Frampton last year, and they probably didn't think too much of it. It looks like Himmelberg, you mentioned your hot scoop was Himmelberg is going to request a trade to GWS. I've just spoiled that for you. Mackesy's retired and Duday's set to leave in free agency. So if he stays, it'll be a huge win for them. But what that has done for them is meant they're pretty weak in the key pillar stocks at the moment. Their forward line's pretty solid. Their ruck line's okay. And their back line is a little bit diminished. So I think they need to bring in a key forward to replace Himmelberg if he goes. Doesn't have to be a good one, just one to be on the list. They need a key defender or a tall defender. They need some defensive depth, and you've said it there. Pod midfield. They've got a lot of one-note players, and they're not bad players. Your Sloans, your Krauters, whatever. Your Berries, who's fallen out of favour a bit. They are all very similar. So if I'm them, Pom, I'm targeting, or depending on the salary cap situation, like a Nick Haynes, who you'll get with a pick probably because he's on $1 million a year to replace Duday. Maybe a Marbia Chol to replace a Himmelberg. Harrison Petty, Tom Sparrow. Like, there are a couple of names that I'd be looking at. And then for the midfield, well, you just need someone who's faster than Rory Sloane because everyone on their team seems to be slow as shit.
It's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, you look at their picks, they've got a really good pick. And this is a really interesting draft that genuinely they deploy stay local kind of thing in the draft. They're very prestigious with South Australian talent. They're not scared, though, to go into state. And in fairness, this year, there is a player that actually suits what they're looking for in Will McCabe. But he is landlocked to Hawthorn, unfortunately, which may upset them a little bit. But when you look at their picks, they can really pick up what they're looking for. You look around 9 straight away. Do you know what I mean? Connor O'Sullivan, we've talked about. Dr. Doofenshmirtz makes that point. He's very similar to Sam Taylor. He's ready to go around 1, particularly if he's playing that second, third ruck and third defender as he gets used to it, as he gets used to the system. And then you look at their second round picks, an absolute plethora of talent. If they're looking for points of difference in the midfield very early, they could be going after your players like George Stevens. I've got Ollie Murphy there as a point of difference there. He's a key defender at Sandy, and he's a pure intercept type. If they were going to go that avenue as well and really do it in. If they get a Sava Ratikalia, you've mentioned a few guys, Tom Sparrow and stuff, that would tide them over now. But their pick selection there says they're going to back their 22 in, probably get a young kid with scope who can start on the outside and swing into the middle in the later years, and probably a stopgap in defence. I think it's a real solid list. Though third youngest in the league to finish 10th. It means you're in with a shout, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. They're in with a shout. They're young. I like a lot of their talent. Someone mentioned in the comments Saligo that they're big fans of. Adelaide love him. They think, and he showed some really good signs during the year when he was unleashed. The Shane McAdam has requested a trade, which hurts their depth a little. Probably doesn't hurt them too much. They've got cover in the forward line for him, so they'll get something back for that. They've got an arsenal of picks which they should go to the draft with, and around the edges, they probably need to find a way to get in a stopgap or an average key defender. But for them, which I think they'll be able to do, and I like them. I'm pretty high on Adelaide for next year. Pretty high on Adelaide.
Mate, I don't think they have much work to do, but we talked about teams that jump, LekDog. This is a team that when I look at it, with all due respect to the Doggies, I feel like it's danger's time. It's danger time. Like, this is the second oldest list in the AFL. So what we've said about Geelong, right? About Geelong, I see with the Dogs as Greg has put up a 700 mil Pav Gin as a prize for someone that answers a hard question from the LekDog. Can LekDog produce a good question? LekDog, while I talk, I'll let you go through the mind of LekDog to think of some ridiculous question. And I agree with Christian. I think you look at their picks, 10, 17, 37, 64, 67, 70, a real good position to be. I agree with Dan Kilgrave. I think Bevo gets away with a lot because he had a fluky flag win. 8 contracts still up in the air. They need midfield point of difference, a little bit like we talked about Adelaide. I feel like they've just copied and pasted the same midfielder. Since Dunkley's gone, they don't have it. Key defender seems to be a must with that team for the last 200 years. I feel like every time I've done one of these shows, we've said, when are they getting a key defender in? We look at last year, they surprisingly took Jed Buslinger, who was probably the most logical choice in that area. But again, he hasn't played. Charlie Clark came in, who I'm surprised hasn't really kicked on because he looked a killer. Liam Jones been injured most of the year. Rory Lobb, what you see is what you get. And Harvey Gallagher and Oscar Baker, who most people would have to Google who that is. LekDog, tell me what is going on with the Dogs.
I will. The question, the best answer to this, it's going to be a Carlton-centric question. So this is the question for everyone in the comments. The best answer, as judged by, I guess, us. Whoever's the judge, Greg could judge. I want Carlton in the off-season to get some sort of forward or ruckman as depth for in the worst case scenario where a TDK or a Charlie or a Harry gets injured. Chat, you've got to sell that who the best player to replace to come into our list is to be a backup forward / ruckman. Has to be realistic, and you need to sell them to me. Can be anyone in the league, but you have to explain to me how we're getting them. All right, the Western Bulldogs, Pom, and I've opened that up for you as well because I think we've discussed this a lot yesterday. The Bulldogs
publicly look like a moron.
No. You keep the answer to yourself because there might be an answer that gets an automatic win. So when we talk about the Western Bulldogs on my old podcast, we would call it the Bevo salad because Bevo would just put all of his players into a salad bowl, shake it up, pour it onto the selection sheet, and where they landed is where they played. So they've got Jack McRae, one of the best inside mids of the last decade, who they play on a wing. They play in a forward pocket. They've lost Dunkley. They didn't really do much to address it. They brought back Liam Jones, which in theory is okay. They play a really tall side pretty much every week. They've got Jordan Sweet, who's requested a trade, who's a really good ruckman at VFL levels, never been able to crack in. I understand that. But they've just got this odd selection. And then they instead of playing these sort of high-end, high-ceiling talent players, they give guys like Anthony Scott or Lockie McNeil or just like job doers. They've got so many job doers and so many high-end talent, but they're just all in the wrong spots. So they could be really good, but I think they need a different coach to be really good, and I don't think that's going to happen. So I look at what they did last year. In theory, I liked all the players they drafted. They just haven't hit yet, and they sent out a few players. The biggest one was Josh Dunkley, which they thought they might be able to replace with a Toby McLean or a Jack McRae might step up, but it just didn't really happen. It was Libba that stepped up, which was great, but for longevity, that's probably not the answer. So far in this offseason, they did add Caleb Poulter, which I really liked in the mid-season draft. So far in this offseason, they've lost Josh Bruce, Mitch Hannon, Robbie McComb, Tim O'Brien, and Cody Rack. Out of contract, Buku Karmas, Dominic Bedendo, Hayden Crozier, Jordan Sweet, who's requested a trade to Port Adelaide, Lockie McNeil, Taylor Duryea, and Toby McLean. I think that they need a backup ruck because they now basically have none on the list. With Jordan Sweet going out, it has to be someone who's willing to not play. They need a younger key defender because it's just they can't just keep topping up with 32-year-olds, I don't think. And I think they need some sort of different mid, an outside mid, a running mid, something that stops them playing Jack McRae out of position or stops them playing Toby McLean out of position. Like just save Bevo from himself. Give him some outside run or at least a midfielder that doesn't need to be in and under the whole time.
Well, I mean, we've suggested players like James Jordan, who I think suits that. I thought he was fantastic when he was at Melbourne playing on their wing before they brought players in. I thought he was superb and would solve that problem with Jackson Macrae. An interesting one, though, I wanted to run by you, chat. And what I'm doing is I'm saving you ruck ideas for LekDog for when we get to Carlton. So you've got about 6 more teams. So don't worry about that. But what I would suggest, I don't know if what you guys feel, is I think you mentioned Dunkley. And I think since Dunkley went, everything has gone downhill. Everything is really unsure. His ability to tag, his ability to work out wide, half forward, and on the ball as a point of difference, it hasn't been replicated. And I think Bon has got a bit of Cripper 2018 about him. If he doesn't go and get the ball, no fucker does. And I think he needs that help. These are one of the teams that, if they can find a way, have to be looking at Harley Reid, because Harley Reid is the clone of Josh Dunkley, probably even a higher ceiling. 10-17 won't get the job done, but 10-17 and something else probably would turn the heads. And you mentioned it themselves, they've got a lot of job doers. If you're West Coast Eagles, job doers are what you need if you're going to hit the draft. This would be one here, I would say, must be looking at Harley Reid.
Look, I think for sure it would be perfect for them. They've obviously had access to some really high talent over the last couple of years, but they've been key position players. And I'm looking at their midfield depth. Yeah. There's not a lot I love. Riley West I really like. Caleb Poulter I really like, but I don't think they're the answers that you're talking about. So if they could find a way to get into the Riley Reid, Harley Reid stakes.
Reid.
I was hoping you'd skip over that, Pom. That'd be amazing. I've got some additional targets. James Jordan, we've sort of mentioned. He's just available, provides some outside mid. Matty Flynn, Tom Duday, if they could find their way into that, he's a free agent. If they've got salary cap, he'd fit in nicely in that back line. Nick Caulfield, Scott Lysett, Bryn Teakle, if just as someone who can come in and doesn't really want to play in the ruck. But I'm with you. They do have a decent arsenal of picks, but what they need is just like a really high-end talent that isn't a 7-foot giant.
Or a porn star from the late 20s. But no, mate, I agree. And when we look at their picks, it is pretty good when you look around there. A lot of players that we are going to recycle. Connor O'Sullivan would definitely fit the bill if they were looking for someone who could play back, because they have a penchant for turning a forward into a defender.
Well,
they could do it the other way, where they have a forward that is now converted to a defender naturally, organically in his draft year in Connor O'Sullivan. Jordan Croft, who we've put down there, really fits the bill. He's a real mobile forward, 200 centimetres, and I think they lack that. And then they've got picks in the great midfield range. So see who you want here. Players like Harry DeMata, Colton Thulstrop, Cohen Sanchez, who's a late bloomer, and he really suits that more diminutive role, which they've liked to do. They're more smaller guy with a bit of pace. And then they go into the bigger bodied midfielders as well, George Stevens, Jack Deline, and players like that they could really add to that list. LekDog, any other senior players they could get in that you feel like from other clubs?
Look, there's not heaps. I've put Nick Caulfield down, but I feel like he fits into a Toby McLean type thing where they probably don't want to take another risk on an injury-prone guy. I think, Bryn Teakle's been delisted. I think he'd be good backup for them in the rucks, do a bit of a swap with Jordan Sweet. But yeah, for them, I'd be gunning, if we're talking available players, I'd be gunning for James Jordan, I'd be gunning for Tom Duday, and I'd be trying to retain Buku Kamas just as a bit of depth in that forward line. I'm interested to see if they can, I'll just check if he's a free agent or not, but Toby McLean, I think he still has upside and someone will buy him. So he is he's an unrestricted free agent, so they won't get anything for him unless someone pays him a shitload. But I would try and probably retain him, but it feels like they're not going to.
A good one from Sandy here as well. We haven't discussed this. Jackson Macrae probably fits, again, what we said about Geelong. If they want to take a step back, the Doggies, because, again, they're an older side. McRae obviously is out of favour with Bevo because he's been one of the few who's been moved to a different position. Is Jackson McRae someone that they maybe look at? Adelaide, the team we talked about last time, definitely suits what they're trying to build. Is there something that they maybe look at there? Do we sacrifice a Jack McRae to even an Eagles to try and accommodate pick one?
I mean, look, if you can do it, you should do it. The Jack McRae's 29. He's contracted for another to the end of 2027. So that would make him 33 by the time that deal ends, and the money's probably quite high. So he probably needs to go to a competing team, which is why I flagged the Geelong as a bit of a YOLO if they don't want to go full rebuild. He's a tough one. He might end up. And I love Jack McRae. He's one of my favourite players. He might end up in the Brodie Grundy category of, fuck, we've overpaid him. We might have to move him on. They could definitely get something for him. It would just, of course, be relevant to salary and how much they're willing to pay. But if they wanted to shake things up, he's definitely a name I'd be looking at, because we saw this year with Libba stepping up. Well, Libba's always good, but Libba playing really well. Bont in the middle there. West, when he had his opportunities, was solid. They kind of got Jack McRae's almost surplus to what they are doing, which is crazy because I think he's probably the best one of the bunch.
Matt, I agree with you. I think it's going to be a real interesting list strategy from them. And then we come to the surprise packet, the late season bloomers, all the Sydney clubs and Carlton were then late season. Many people were asking questions early doors, sorted it out in the end. A perpetual list masterclass, usually from Sydney. Again, retaining really high value picks 11, 23, 31, 42. Finished 8th. 3 changes. A team that traditionally makes their list management decisions late in the piece anyway. Last year, as you expect from Sydney, they hung back. They didn't get involved in any deals. They took some really good players as well in the draft. Constante, Magnor, Caleb Mitchell. And then some speculative picks in Cooper Owen and Cooper Vickery, who could be anything. Again, jettisoned out some of their senior players, which we expect them to do again this year. They are definitely a team, though, when you look at their list needs, they are the inverse of the Doggies. They have got a lot of good players on the outside, some quick players, probably lacking, since Kennedy retired, that big body guy that wins a hell of a lot of contested football to complement them outside players. You've seen Caelan Mills try and fulfill it, and it hasn't quite worked. And then he went out and
now his shoulder's broken.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So it's going to be interesting what they do. Brodie Grundy is one of their big targets this year so far. LekDog, tell me about these guys.
Yeah, so I think generally they make good decisions. Brought in Aaron Francis last year for nothing, and he ended up filling a really vital role for them. He wasn't always best 22, but they obviously had some depth issues down back. They brought in Constante, Magor, Owen, Vickery, and Edwards. None of those names blow your hat off, but I think Constante will end up making his way into this side and being a really dangerous player for them. Last year, they lost a fair bit of experience in Callum Sinclair, Naismith, Kennedy, and then this year, Tom Hickey, which is why you're going to see Brodie Grundy head up there for nothing. Franklin's also retired and McCartan's also retired. McCartan is unfortunate, but probably, again, they've got an Aaron Francis there. They might look to bring in another key pillar down back just to bolster that up a bit. And Franklin, we knew he was going to leave for a while. So I think they need some general defenders. I think that's the part of the list that's aging quite rapidly. I'm talking your Rampies, your Lloyds, your Foxes, your Cunninghams. They're all sort of 30 plus. So I would be looking, if I was them, to get some sort of general defender. We know they need a ruckman. And I'd be looking, as you said, for another sort of inside mid bull. They've tried a couple of guys through there. I think they're big on Sheldrick. I think they're big on Roberts, but I don't necessarily think they're the bull that they want inside, but I think they'll get a run through the midfield, and I quite like those players. They've also got plenty of contracts to sort out. Cameron Owen, out of contract, Dylan Stevens, Hugo Hall, Kayan, Ryan Clark, Sam Wicks, Jaden Magor, Rankin, Sheether, Reed, and Gould are all out of contract. which is quite a lot of players. Not all best 22, but Clark we saw play, Wicks we see play regularly, and Dylan Stephens, well, he's sort of their Paddy Dow. High draft pick, doesn't get an opportunity, will probably look to move somewhere else. In terms of number one concern, it's ruck, but they've already seemingly solved that, haven't they, Pom, with Brodie Grundy?
Mate, spot on. And some good conversations going in about tagging as well, LekDog. People complaining about Finn McGuinness. Very old school tagger. Do you know what I mean? Limits his roles. And we are seeing players like William Drew, Finn McGuinness, William Drew and Josh Dunkley becoming that modern tagger, having 25, 30 touches and stopping you play, where McGuinness is more of that old school thug who is just there to beat you up a little bit. You look at Sydney, and it's great conversation. They probably need that more thuggish mentality. And that's why we talked about, we've got Dan Curtin here, who is very speculative for them. Been playing down the back for Claremont, but then has been jettisoned as the midfield. Now, you might remember a guy called Brodie Kemp. And if you listen to Brodie Kemp's coach at the time, he did that to showcase his proficient ball use. And it kind of got mistranslated that he was an inside midfielder. Interesting, Claremont have said he is playing as a full-time midfielder. They actually see that as the modern-day way of playing. Now, if Sydney do look at that and say, right, inside ball, guy's an elite player by foot, 195, 92 kgs, he's got an elite engine on him, he's probably not going to be the midfielder straight away. But the way Sydney work, they could probably quite happily maybe look at a 30-year-old to come in and do the job now, and then probably next year, the year after, ready to be jettisoned on the ball. That could be a way for Sydney to go, because that seems to be their model. They're not a team that gets the Band-Aid fix. They're quite happy to play the long game, and that's probably why they're such a good list management side, isn't it, LekDog? Yeah,
they don't stuff about too much. They obviously got banned when they got Buddy Franklin in. Was it Buddy Franklin or Kurt Tippett? Well, they got in trouble for both of those, which was crazy at the time and still is. But you're right. They tend to not go for Band-Aid fixes. But I think particularly with Callum Mills potentially missing half the year, depends who you believe, it wouldn't do him a disservice to look at a solid temporary midfielder just to sort of bolster that. And we've talked about James Jordan a fair bit today. He's not the exact fix, but he could be a fix. I mean, if Dylan Shield wasn't on, 900 or $1 million or whatever he's on a year, you could look at him as a bit of a replacement for a year or two. But primarily, I think they'll ideally look at getting a midfielder in, but that'll be their focus in the draft more than in the trade period. I think trade and free agency, it's going to be Brodie Grundy. It's going to be, they're going to put their hat in the ring for Tom Doedee. They're going to look at a Nick Caulfield. They just need to get a little bit younger down back, which they can do quite easily with what's available. And you can always pick up those spare defenders. We saw Lockie Hunter get delisted by North Melbourne today, and he's someone who I still think has something to offer at AFL level, not as a permanent best 22 player, but you put him in a Sydney Swans Guernsey, and I guarantee you he'll be a better player than he was in a North Melbourne one. It is something Sydney have had success with. I can see Sydney going for like your 32, 33-year-old inside midfielder now, getting a draftee, saying, right, he's got a year. Like you were saying about their other positions around the ground, you can guarantee their ruckman, they're already planning for life without Grundy. And that's why they're really good. They really do that model. I think they're an interesting case. Young side, lots of picks, prime position in the draft as well, then picks for finding good ones. And that's something that, bear in mind, Sydney do that tens with their picks quite often. Yeah. Really maximize their percentage of finding a top-level player. Yeah, absolutely. Just one name that I've just thought of as well. I wouldn't even mind a Reece Matheson if they wanted a player just to fill a gap until Callum Mills is back from Brisbane, because he averages about 40 disposals in the VFL, but just can't get into Brisbane's team. So just another name. Mate, I love it. And then we come on to their mates, their rivals, GWS. A fantastic year this year, finishing 7th.
A team that really have probably set the benchmark, in my opinion, for how Tasmania should go about their work, hoarding the early picks and then trading them out. And now we're starting to see more of a traditional rebuild. Last year, particularly, they traded hard for Cadman, who they have heavy raps on. Haven't seen much of him, but Toby Bedford has been a sensational acquisition. They've gone with the Category B rookies, which they like to do. McMullen, Gruzkowski, Darcy Jones and Ralston through their academies, as we expect. Again, we expect a few academies this year as well. Incidentally, later in the draft with Charlie McCormick and Harvey Thomas, who will get picked up with their late picks, which is why I think they've hung on to their fourth rounders so much. 4 changes to go, 4 changes locked. Still think they need that forward depth now. Jesse Hogan's been good, but I think Himmelberg has admitted himself he prefers playing down the back, and I think he looks a lot better, which really helps them if they can get a forward in now. We've listed Elliot Himmelberg, who the rumours are in the next couple of days will request to trade to GWS. Nate Caddy in the draft, I think, suits what they're building and suits that. We've asked for midfield help as well. Feel like they are one short in the midfield to really compete with the big boys. You saw Collingwood do that. It's going to be interesting, isn't it, LekDog? Tell me about GWS.
Yeah, they're an interesting side. I think people thought they'd be bottom 4 or bottom 6, and they've ended up in the top 8. Last year, Cadman tick. I mean, we haven't seen him, but just tick in terms of they need a developing key forward. Toby Bedford was a big tick. Gilby, who they've already delisted. Nick Madden backup. McMullen. I like Max Krasuski a lot. He's missed a lot of the last couple of years with injuries, but I think, again, he's that developing key position pillar that they'll look at in a few years to play. Darcy Jones and Harry Ralston, who got a few games for him. They lost Hopper. They lost Hill and they lost Taranto, and I think that was the basis of people thinking that they would probably miss out and drop off the face of the planet, but they were able to cover those guys relatively well with the talent they had, and that's a credit to their drafting over the years. Out of so far this year, they've lost Phil Davis. He's retired. They delisted Cameron Fleeton, who I was surprised by. He's not a household name, but he was in the VFL Team of the Year in the defense. I quite like Cameron Fleeton, and I think a lot of teams could do worse than looking at him as a delisted free agent. Gilby, I mentioned, and Daniel Lloyd. So far, they haven't lost that much. Bruce is out of contract. Cooper Hamilton, Matthew Flynn, and Lachlan Keefe. Lachlan Keefe will go if they get Elliot Himmelberg. They'll keep one of Bruce or Flynn, I suspect. I reckon it'll be Flynn as a backup to Kieran Briggs. I don't think they hold on to Braden Bruce, who can't get on the park. And I like their depth a lot across the board, Pom. You're right. I think forward and mid, depth, development and depth is where they need to look at. But broadly, they're in a really solid position. So you mentioned Elliot Himmelberg. You mentioned Nate Caddy. Guys that we've spoken about behind the scenes, like Mitch Georgiades, unlikely but could happen. Buku Karmas, unlikely but could happen. And then in terms of mid-depth, I've listed Will Brodie, right? He's locked in at Fremantle, but he's the type of player I think they could go and get if they wanted to. Zach Fisher, Paddy Dow, sort of developed guys who could come in and play a role straight away. And as a little spicy pick, I also wouldn't mind them getting one more sort of goal-kicking small forward. So I've chucked in Sam Wicks as a name of note. But broadly, Pom, I think they just need to go to the draft, get the best players available, and I think they'll be able to fill any holes they need with sort of fringe players like your Himmelbergs. Another team that I'm really big on after seeing it out on the park this year.
They're an interesting predicament as well. When we talk about draft picks, GWS have historically had keep players in a very good environment. So try and draft players from the same environment, and which is why they've had for an interstate side, they've had quite a high success rate at avoiding trade backs because of their states. They've done pretty well of that across the years. Now, I think it's really interesting, 6 and 15. Now, since the AFL have given pick 3 for Ben Mackay, rumoured, you'd imagine if North Melbourne are going to have 2 trains of thought, is it 2 and 3 for pick 1 and pick 19 coming back, and then they'll have 3 picks in them 20s. Is that one that they do, right? Or are they sincere and go Riley Saunders very early? Probably 3 picks too early, but because they've got pick 3 for free, they just do it, get him there. If they don't, though, I think GWS are the team to watch, because I could see them going Riley Saunders and then linking him with their Tasmanian mate, James Leake, right? And really keeping that Tasmanian pair together. 2 options here. Both of them have been heavily involved in the Tasmanian coming into the AFL and been very excited, which means they may have future trade value to Tasmania, which is something GWS are very clever at doing. Or it does give them options of doing it. We've got Nate Caddy, though, down as one of their draftee guys, who I think straight away, unlike Cadman, can probably play off their toes quite quickly and be that third given his size. So I reckon it'll be an interesting one.
Yeah, I think Caddy would be a good one for them just because he can probably participate straight away. Looking at their depth chart, I've got Hogan, Cadman, and Riccardi as their key forwards, which is solid, but Lee's been wanting a little bit more. They've got Grzuski and Dirksen in the background, but I don't think they're going to play anytime soon. I think while we're talking about them, we should shout out the awesome job they've done with their defenders. So I'm talking your I'm blanking here. Absolutely, but your Connor Idens.
Connor Idens has been amazing.
He's been absolutely amazing. They've got Callum Brown, who's up forward, who's been amazing. But Jack Buckley, another guy that just out of nowhere has just showed up and become a really solid player. And it's probably why they're trying to get rid of, well, not get rid of Haynes. It's also the $1 million they're paying him, but they're really stocked in defense. And a lot of those players, I think, can develop and eventually play further up the ground if they need to. So it's just target talent, target guys who can impact sooner rather than later. They've got quite a few project players on this list that over time will start to come in. We'll see more Lekalier, we'll see more Grzuski, we'll see more Cadman. So for me, if you can get a caddy or you can get a midfielder that comes in and plays straight away alongside Green and Kelly and Caniglio and all those guys, I think you're laughing.
Mate, I agree with you. And I think Sam Taylor as well, Christian.
Yeah, he's too good to mention.
Mate, but I do think it's worth mentioning about list management. 3 years ago, this was the 6th oldest side in the list, right? And just quietly, they're now the 12th. So they've done this micro rebuild very subtly. Very subtly. So I think...
And they'll get younger again this year.
Yeah. With what they're trying to do and what they're trying to achieve. I think it's very, very exciting at GWS. And they've done very, very well. But then we go on to everyone's favourite team to hate, and that is St. Kilda.
Wowee. Hang on. The news has broken in the chat that Lockie Plowman has announced his retirement, and Carlton have just gone with it. Wowee. We love Lockie Plowman on this show.
I was going to save it for the Collingwood thing. Carlton bit. So,
he deserves a minute of applause, I think.
You know what is sad? He'll always live because Lockie Jack named the Penguin. So Plowman never retires. He always stays here, behind Uncle Pom. So Lockie Plowman has gone, but St. Kilda, who are now looked after by Stephen Silvani, which means it's time for Carlton to become the new GWS and trade shit for second round picks. St. Kilda have a very
players.
Yeah. St. Kilda have a very good pick Arsenal in the grand scheme of things, 12, 32, 51, 87. You can do a lot with them first 2 picks, particularly. They've already made 4 changes, 10 underway, with Gresham being one of them heavily sorted. They are an inverse Carlton, though, in their needs. They love an outside midfielder and then realise one of them has to go and get the ball, which is a nightmare. Point of difference in the forward line, they definitely need some help for Max King. You saw when he got injured and Membry was on his own, or when Max King was on his own, They definitely need that point of difference. And their smalls are all the same player, copied and pasted as well. They really do need that pressure-based forward. We've gone with Paddy Dow as their guy. LekDog, tell me more about St Kilda. Great start to the year, horrible back end.
Yeah, and Ross Lyon came out and said basically when they were in that losing patch that their list was no good. So I think he's going to shake it up. Last year they bought in Anthony Caminiti, which was a really good pickup in the SSP. Zane Cordy played a role. Keeler, Houghton, McLennan, Phillip, who you love. He's going to be a star, and Stocker was solid. James Van Ness as well. They lost a bit of experience last year, including in the ruck. They lost Paddy Ryder, and they probably didn't fix that up, and they may look to do that this off season. So far, they've delisted Oscar Adams, Jack Bytel, Leo Connolly, and Jack Paris, which I thought was surprising. I thought he kind of fits into what they're trying to do there. They've also got plenty of players out of contract, Pom. So Daniel McKenzie, Hunter Clark, Jade Gresham, Tom Campbell, Tom Highmore, Jimmy Webster, Liam Stocker, Nick Caulfield, Brian Burns, Zach Jones. There are a lot of players that will either have currency or push for best 18 in this St Kilda side. I think people underrate like what the McKenzie and the Websters have done for them over the years. They're fringe players now, but guys like Hunter Clark, Gresham, Stocker, Caulfield, they're best 22 players right now. They need foot speed in the mid. They need a bit of pod in the forward line. They need a bit of help there, but I also think they need backup ruck. And I think they probably they're looking at inside mid depth, because I think they're worried about if Jack Steele's healthy all the time, or if they want to maybe trial him in a slightly different role. And that's why there's rumors of them trading for Dylan Shield. That's why there's rumors of them looking for Paddy Dow. Liam Henry has requested a trade to St Kilda, or if he hasn't officially, he's going to, which I think he ticks that outside mid box. People think of him as a forward, but he really played a lot of this year on the wing. It was quite good in that role. And if I was them, I'd be bringing home a favourite son. I'd be bringing home Reece Stanley as that Paddy Ryder backup ruck, help Rowan Marshall if he needs it role. I think he's a perfect fit for what they're after. And I think given Ross Lyons at the helm, I think that's a reasonable shout at this stage.
Mate, I think it will be. I think they've got to get a bit creative here, because you look at their list. I always feel sorry for Saints, because I think people downplay their list, really. I really do. I think their list for me is just as AFL average as it gets. I think they've got ticks everywhere, but the problem is they haven't got that sexy tick. Do you know what I mean? They haven't got that. You don't look at anyone at St Kilda and go, oh my God, I can't wait to watch this player play next week. Right? Do you know what I mean? And I mean that with all the respect in the world. I look at their list and I wouldn't pay to see any of their players play. Do you know what I mean? But yeah. I don't mind them. Do you know what I mean? Like, if they were on my list, don't mind them, but I don't go, oh, wow, fuck me. What a player Jack Steele is. Do you know what I mean? I just go, he's a very steady player. So I can see why they're linked with Dylan Shield. I think Paddy Dow is a great acquisition for them, because they've got someone that gets the game going forward. I think they've got some really good young players in Phillippo, who Phillippo, for me, is one of my favourite players in last year's draft. And I think he'll go from strength to strength. And then I also look at players like you've mentioned, you know, maybe it's a Reece Stanley, maybe it's bringing a player back like that to tide them over. We talked about foot speed, point of difference of the forward line. In the draft, 1232 get you a lot of sexy things, and I can really see this side looking at Darcy Wilson. He is really the type of player that Ross Lyon will froth. You mentioned Liam Henry as well. He'd suit that type of mold as well. Real good pressure in that forward line, loves a tackle, which is the thing I think they lack. I think their forward line lacks that defensive pressure that complements the class they've got with Phillippo and Butler. Be a very interesting off-season for me.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And they've got a lot of guys. We talked about the Bulldogs having very similar players. These are the same. Like, tell me the difference between Jack Billings, Jade Gresham, Hunter Clark, Nick Caulfield. I don't know the difference between them. I know they're all kind of the same player, and that is at their best, they're very good. But we just haven't either seen them on the park consistently enough, or they're very inconsistent in delivering the best. And I think they probably will need to let go of a couple of those guys and bring in a couple of more surefire players, or if not more surefire, at least younger versions of the same players, so you can develop them under the new regime. I think we'll see a few players leave. I don't hate, like, I love Machito Owens. I love Anthony Caminiti. He's a great story. Naziah Wanganeen-Maliri is really bloody good. He proved me wrong. I thought he was going to get stuck on the wing for them and not really be too involved, but they've utilized him really well down back. So they do have players I like. I just don't know. And maybe it was injury pom that kept them struggling in the forward line a bit this year, because Jack Hayes didn't play. They were relying on a guy that hadn't been on a list until February to play most of the games. So maybe some of that improvement in the forward line will come from within, but yeah, I'm not sure. I think we'll see plenty of movement based on Ross's comments, based on the picks they have, and based on the amount of players they have out of contract.
I think Jack nails it as well. I think when you look, I think Christian and Jack nail it. Clark, Billings, Caulfield are the type of players that people like Ross hate, because they're either 10, 1, or they're in the doctors. Right? And Ross, I think to Christian's point, this is my issue with Ross the boss, right? I think he's a terrific coach if you want to finish 6th to 12th every year. Never get battered, but never become your Adelaides or your Collingwoods, that game style that really takes the game on once. He's always safety first and percentages. And he says he's changed. I thought back end of the season, you saw it with his selections. He hasn't. It's what he knows. A dog can't pretend to be a cat as much as it wants to be. It's always going to be a dog. And I think this is going to be a really interesting trade period, because I think Paddy Dow, Liam Henry coming in is very interesting, because he's that exciting player. I still feel, though, that he's going to be after 2 or 3 really solid players. That the Liam Stocker deal, he needs 3 more of them.
Yeah. I think he's really good at extracting every ounce of talent out of the players that he likes, or the players that he chooses to bring in, or is a part of those decisions. And I think Liam Stocker's a great example. He turned him into he didn't play every game, but he played almost every game. He turned him into a really solid contributor, and probably got his maximum output out of him. And I think he can do that with a Dow. I think he could do that with a Henry. It's just it's how much he wants to cull the list, I think, is the question. And I think he'll want to do it a fair bit, fairly quickly.
Yeah, and when we look, there's a lot of players, particularly around his 2nd and 3rd pick, that will fit the bill. Do you know what I mean? Cooper Simpson, we've talked about him a few times. He would be a dream for Voss and for Ross to have in his team, because he's reliable. He does the simple things. He doesn't piss about. Do you know what I mean? He does it. And that's why I think Paddy Dow would be a good acquisition, because I think the way Ross traditionally plays his game, he has a player like Dow who gets the ball going forward, and then he's backed up by 5 players that really defend hard. So I think he would have the freedom of expression that's very limited in a Ross the boss team.
Yep. And I think it just speaks to the fact that there's rumours they're trading for Dylan Shield. I think that says to me that they do need that inside player, and Paddy Dow's a younger version of that.
A likeable version as well. This has changed since then, and I'm going to tell you what I'll do. Look, just because I love you, Lockie Jack, and I hate to do this to you, right? But I know he's one of our friend LekDog's favourite players. But I will share my screen and show you the horrible news, right? So you know. You know, Lockie Jack, this is just because I love you as well. But there you are. Carlton have officially announced that Lockie Plowman, 125 games, has announced his retirement. Do you know what I mean? So you know, I'm not lying, and I'm not doing it to wind you up. Far be it from me to ever wind you up. But this is our team. The Blues. So the Blues, they've made 2 changes, 6 contracts up in the air now. Do you know what I mean? Just remember that. That's changed. Very interesting picks. Pick 16, 65, and 73. Not a great pick selection.
No.
Definitely need a forward point of difference, particularly that half forward. And I think with the players that are leaving, Carlton are in that happy position where we talked about Sydney. They've got the older guy, the guy ready to replace him, and then the project. Carlton need to now get the project to be that second player and have that replacement waiting in the wings. We've put Elijah Hollands, Colston Tholstrop, who is my favourite player in this draft. LekDog, tell us about our Mighty Blues off-season last year. What was it like?
It was a really good one. And by the way, shout out to Lockie Plowman, who had the shittest job during the shittest time in Carlton history. That rebuild where he had to play on small forwards every week. God bless that man for showing up and doing his job. Last off-season, Bob, we bought in Blake Acres, tick. We bought in Jackson Binns, VFL Team of the Year. I'm calling that a tick. We bought in Alex Chincotta for nothing in the SSP, calling that a tick. Lockie Cowan got some exposure, drafted with pick 30, calling that a tick. And Ollie Hollands was in our best 22 almost all year. Pick number 11, exactly what we needed. We're calling that a tick. Also brought in Harry Lemmy as a key position forward depth and Hudson O'Keefe as a ruck position depth. So I think the ins they brought in last year were really good and they were really integral to what we did this year, both in the VFL, even though we fell short in the VFL, and in the AFL as well. And what went out last year was not heaps, really. I mean, Will Hayes, Oscar McDonald, Jack Nunes, Luke Parks, Will Setterfield was traded, Liam Stocker was delisted, and Tom Williamson was delisted. I think we're going to see more of the same this year with similar ilks of players to your Setterfields and your Stockers moved on. Currently, Ed Kerno, Lockie Plowman have retired. We should end up having about 6 list spots once all said and done. Out of contract is Caleb Marchbank, David Cunningham. They are both about to re-sign. Josh Honey, we suspect he's delisted. Paddy Dow, we suspect he's traded. Sam Philp, I don't know what they're going to do with Sam Philp. And then Sam Durden, who I think they keep for depth in the key position ranks. I'm with you. They probably need a high half forward or a half forward target. They probably need some long-term or break glass in case of emergency midfield depth, because once you take out, so I'm just pulling up my depth chart. Once you take out, let's say Lockie O'Brien gets traded, Sam Philp, Zach Fisher, Ed Kerno, Paddy Dow, suddenly that's 5 players who aren't best 22, but if you needed to, could play. And you need good players in your VFL side as well. Once all them come out, we're going to need a little bit of depth in the midfield. And I've also written here, which is the question we asked before, a ruck forward. I'd love another backup ruck forward. I've accepted emotionally and mentally, I've accepted it. It's not going to happen, Bomb. They're not going to touch the rucks, but I still am going to put that as a target. I really want a ruck forward in the event that Pito or TDK or Harry Mackay or whatever get hurt, because currently the gap between Charlie Curnow, Harry Mackay, and Harry Lemmy or TDK and Hudson O'Keefe is pretty bloody big.
Well, we set you a challenge for the prize, so we'll look at them. Goldstein, says Ryan and Mel, because we get him for chips, 1-year contract, never gets injured, and he's a good player. So that's option 1, LekDog. Scott Lycett, because he's a Premiership ruckman and still has plenty to give. Yeah, and he's got that Premiership experience, hasn't he? So that's good. The lad from Port, Mays, take him. Won't need him if Ratticalier is heading over. That's a good one from Chills. Jay doubling down on Lycett. I agree. And Maribor from Dan Kilgrave. So LekDog, them options. What are your thoughts on them?
Yeah. Sandy also shouted out Lord from Port, but we'd have to give up something probably unrealistic.
Oh,
Riley
yeah.
Kell from Adelaide. So my favorite answer from this, and I think they're all solid, right? So I'll just address them all. Goldstein, I like the idea. I've been calling for that for about 3 years. Does he come in and is he okay with not playing? And he wants to have a coaching gig afterwards. So we've got Matty Cruiser right now. Goldie probably wants to still play footy. So I'm going to say no to Goldie. Scott Lycett, I think, Jay, great suggestion. My issue with Scott Lycett is he kicks about 1 goal a year. So if I need him to pinch it in the forward line, he can't probably do that. So I think I'm going to go, I think Daniel Kilgrave, I think Marby Achol, let's take salary out of it, blah, blah, blah. He's on the block. I think he's probably what you need. because I imagine he's comfortable not playing best 22 every week and would understandably be behind Charlie Curnow and Harry Mackay, but can kick goals. But equally, he can actually pinch hit in the ruck. So Pito, Tom DeConning can do that. No one else on the list really can. I know Jack Silvani's done it, but that's not where you want Jack Silvani. So for me, Daniels given my favourite answer in Marbia Chol.
So if you're in the chat there, Greg, Dan Kilgrave is the winner of your prize. LekDog, being a man of his word. I won't tell you who I suggested. Oh, fuck it, I will. You know what I suggested? Ironically, wouldn't it be great to bring Levi back? The replacement backup key forward for a year while we get more legs into Harry Lemmy and break glass in case of emergency if Harry and Charlie. And I hate myself for suggesting it. But me and LekDog had a long phone call saying we need a backup key forward who ain't going to die. And that was the guy we came in. But Elijah Hollands, obviously, the reports are a future second, a future third. People forget about Elijah Hollands, was tracking for pick 1 the year he was drafted before injury curtailed him. Much public injury with battle with injury and a massive turnaround. And Gold Coast have given him huge raps this year. Played a lot of games in VFL, definitely got on top of his fitness rows and looks set to join the Blues on what will be a cut price deal. We talked about Colston Thulstrop, who is, like I said, my favourite player in this year's draft. And if we were going to pedigree a player to play for Carlton, this is it. Voss likes that 188 type half forward, port play it. It's probably the thing we're lacking. Strong overhead, X factor, massive kick penetration, elite kick on him as well. And he is a natural goal kicker. I think this could be the Carlton dream asset. Elijah comes in, Colston learning the ropes. Bang, Carlton a set straight away.
Yeah, I think I've done my depth chart so far for Carlton for next year, and I don't have Hollands starting in our best 22. But what the benefit of a Hollands is that he can play mid, but he's shown that he can go forward, take marks, kick goals, and set up goals, which is really exciting. In his draft year before he got injured, which don't we love players who get injured in their draft year? Very sort of not the same player, but had Jack Martin-esque qualities in his game style. So he's probably in contention with a Jack Silvani, Jack Martin, Lockie Fogarty, one of those guys in the forward line, and he's probably behind Adam Chera or a Matt Kennedy in the midfield. So I don't think he's just necessarily best 22, but I think he could crack in pretty quickly, assuming that he's over all his injuries and he had his solid VFL year. So I like him. We've also got Rob Monahan and Matt Duffy coming in. They're not in the realm of competing for spots, Pom, but we know that we've already signed them, so it's worth noting that they come in. And then if we're going to just talk other targets quickly, a Levi Casbolt would be solid. Brodie McLaughlin, I would love from Gold Coast, who they signed in the mid-season draft or the SSP last year, I can't remember, but kicked a shitload of goals in the VFL as a not true tall key position forward, but still able to mark goals. I've got James Jordan, Lockie Keefe as a backup rucky sort of pinch hitting that he does at GWS. I've got Jack Paris as a bit of pace. I've got Toby McLean just because he's from the Bulldogs, and we know that Nick Austin loves bringing one Bulldog every year, but it sounds like, since I wrote this list, it sounds like Hayden Crozier is going to be the man that he brings in this year, Pom, which I can't really make heads or tails of, but we have to bring in one Bulldog. That's the rule.
I would say the reason that, and I've got a theory. Do you want to know the Pom theory? Hayden Crozier is regarded as the best trainer at the Bulldogs. So Beveridge has mentioned him a few times as he's the standard setter, stays behind after class, works hard. We've lost Ed Curnow, who has been that for us. I think that's a backup. He comes in, Carlton bring him in as that standard setter and that developer. So Elijah Hollands, a few of you asking questions. Is he what we need? 100%. So I remember him in his draft year. Cal Toomey did his report. He actually had him 2 picks above Jamara Ugle-Hagan. at the start. He went down with injury, started to convert into a midfielder. Gold Coast have trialled this. He got injured again. This year, they have gone back to the game plan of him playing at high half forward permanently. And he's basically the opposite side of Jack Martin. If you watched him against Carlton round 22, absolutely tore us up with playing that David Cunningham type role, pinch hitting in the midfield when they needed him, then being that conduit kick. And he's that kick that I complain about all the time with us. He is that 65 player. Do you know what I mean? That 65 meter, taking the kick and then going deep, launching deep with him. So Elijah comes in. If you listen to the Ollie Hollands interview as well, very interesting little gambit from Ollie Hollands, who said that Elijah told him, when you join an AFL club, do everything and try anything, right? At least once, and then complain about it after. Don't ever resist, which maybe that's just reading into what was said. Maybe why he's had a few injuries at the start of his year. Maybe he dug his heels in. It's a very difficult thing. Speaking to these draftees, when they're touted as pick one, it's a big culture shock for them very early doors because things change. But I think he's a risk-free, 100%. Anyone who knows anything about football, if the rumours are a second, third rounder, he is 1,000% better than anyone in late round 2, round 3 this year. He's a walk-up start. And Colston Tholstrup is impressive. Probably ready for AFL football already at his young age. Playing for Subiaco, so it is something that Carlton know. One of the more tougher leagues as well. And it's interesting, one of the few juniors in this year's draft to play more than one game for state-level sides. He played in the full waffle, averaging a goal a game and 5 tackles. So that is a real interesting little gambit there for you with Colston Tholstrup, that he's already played with men in a very strong system. Kingslayer, very easy. This second chance players, Carlton are going to be boasting their list. So you can't look at the stats there. A guy who's been injured, Carlton are going to be taking a chance on a player to back themselves up. So plays different roles. You're playing a winger versus a high half forward.
Yeah. The other thing to note, Pom, is that obviously we've got the Camporelli brothers next year in the draft. So the Blues will likely be looking to move on, say, their future first next year for either multiple picks to acquire points, or just don't be surprised if we see them do some stuff, move some players on for future draft picks rather than assets this year, just to build up that bank of points to get 2 players that right now are arguably top 20 wingers or top 20 midfielders in the next draft.
This could be something that we have seen a lot from the AFL. Melbourne have been a team that does this, trades future first quite early on. And it's how they've built some of their lists, particularly in the 16-17 period. So what Carlton might be doing here with the future first, and I want you to look at North Melbourne. If you're a Carlton fan and you've complained about the North Melbourne package, you probably haven't thought of the big picture, because their future firsts have come with a caveat. And that is, if they're not traded, they will be reanalyzed at the end of next year. So let's just say North Melbourne finish 15th, 16th, get better than this year. There's a chance they'll cut them out, right? There's a chance they'll cut them out. Now, Carlton will no way have their first round pick in their hands next year. They'll look to on-trade that. Because of the AFL compensation system for father-sons, it's a massive change. And at the moment, if the draft was done today, one brother is pick 14, the other brother is pick 30. So in the real life, that is 1,300 when you match the bid, right? 1,300 for the both with the discount when you match the bid, which is a staggering 10 picks different from real money when you combine it. So that would actually equate for Carlton in real money at 1,300, meaning that they only have to give up picks of a value of pick would be pick 12 for both kids, right? With the discount. So what that would look like with the discount scheme is not that bad. It is basically 2 lots of pick 27s.
Yep, a couple of seconds, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's why Carlton will look at next year's first, and probably I could see a trade with North Melbourne's picks, which with the compensation picks next year, even though it's end of the first, would be 24 and 25. And North Melbourne will know that next year, some of their picks are that. I can explain it. So, the very easy system. Imagine pick 1 is worth 3,000 points. When you're a father-son, when you get what's called the discount, and that brings it down to 2,400. So roughly, that gets worse every pick. So 2,517. Tell you what, I can do better than that. Let me see if I can edit this. Here we are. Let's hide my top secret book for a second. Because I can't have people stealing my thing. But here we are on your screen now. You should see what the compensation scheme looks like. And this is locked in for the next 3 years. It is due to be reassessed 2025. So this won't bother Carlton. But here you are. What you'll see is where the clubs have spots now versus in the future. So
basically, if your player, if Nick Dacos is going at pick 1 in the draft, pick 1 is worth 3,000 imaginary points. Collingwood would only have to give up pick 3 to get him. So if he was bid on pick 1 or they had pick 1, they would trade pick 1 knowing that he'll get bid on. They only have to give up the equivalent of pick 3 in value. So for us, if we trade out our first next year, we will only need to use 2 seconds to match both players that get bid on, both of the Camperellis, assuming one's a first round and one's a late second round. So it's in our interest to get rid of our early picks so that any bids that come on the Camperellis, we don't automatically lose those picks. Better off trading our future picks into this.
A good example is how corrupt this system is, right? Is let's just say Camperelli went pick 1, right? So that's this chart here, right? So 3,000 they've bid on. Carlton would have to match it, pay 2,400, right? And if you look, right, there is also a 10% rule, right? Which means if it's close enough, it's near enough, it's good enough, right? So a really good example here is let's just say Carlton had these 2 picks here, right? If you add them 2 together, right, you get, well, wait, that's well over.
Yeah.
Here, sorry. Here we are. If you get these 2 here, so that is effectively, that is what? 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15. That would actually match the bid from the AFL. If Carlton only had them 2 picks, which are shit picks in the grand scheme of things, that's pick 14 and 15, and they went at 1, that would be counted. So Carlton would lose them picks. They go into the ether as well. They don't come back. No one owns them. AFL just pretends it never happens and said, I don't know what you're on about. But that's how easy it is. So that's why. And just to confirm, it's either a second or a third. That not both. Elijah Hollands, they are requesting what is expected to be a late second, early third. So that will be a good deal. Why is that relevant to father-son? So the AFL made an amendment 3 years ago that NGA academies are void unless you're in the northern states. So that's Queensland, that's GWS and Sydney Swans. They have all their players protected from 1 to 100. Victorian clubs have their players protected 40 plus. So if someone like Domaku was in the draft and someone bid him at 38, Carlton can't match. But with the father-sons, the AFL understand to stop teams being dickheads. So if you had pick 1 like West Coast Eagles, right? If you were West Coast Eagles this year and you look at the AFL draft, right, and you want to be a smart Alec, right, you could go, right, you know what I'm going to do with my pick 1? I am going to bid on Jed Walter, and then I'm going to bid on Ethan Reid, and then I'm going to bid on Jake Rogers, and then when I finish doing that, I'm going to bid on Colby McCurcher, and I'm going to bid on Riley Sanders, and I'm going to bid on Jordan Croft and Will McCabe, right? They would then effectively have to pay 3,000 points, the other clubs, to keep their player, which pick 1 is the most valuable pick by a long way. It would effectively mean 8 clubs never get any picks in this draft. So pick 1 would essentially be able to ban any other picks. So the AFL came up with this agreement where they discount them a little bit so other teams don't have to miss all their picks and still have trade and draft arsenal to go into the draft. Because otherwise, West Coast Eagles effectively, if you actually got rid of all these rules and went back to 2018, West Coast Eagles could effectively make Hawthorn, Dogs, Melbourne, Gold Coast have no picks from 1 pick.
Yep. So
which is a good idea. We should go back to that.
I agree. We should go back to bidding constantly like Sauce used to, where you just bid, and then go, no, I'm trading the pick. But yeah, so it applies to some academies and father-son.
Question from chat, Matt Gondolfo. Rookie list Philp. Might as well. We've got no picks.
Yeah. Might as well. Unless you've got some delisted free agents or free agents you already know are going to come in. Yeah, I think it's fine. What's the downside?
And
anyway, we've probably spent enough time on Carlton Bomb.
Well, I've got one more just caveat question, just without notice. Future pick 1, right? Future pick 1, right? What do you think about Carlton giving up their future first, right? For Gold Coast, for not trying to get a deal with North Melbourne. What would you be looking at for a future first? So a future first, if we're logical, we're going to guess is around that happy medium 15. Let's just say 15. Yeah. What would we be looking for? What would you be trying to ascertain for that future first?
That's a good question. I'd love... I mean, you kind of pay extra to get a pick now. So if North Melbourne have pick 19 or whatever it is, I don't know what picks they have this year. If North Melbourne have pick, I think you would do it. You're taking a loss, but getting back into the draft this year, because I think the Blues have talked pretty consistently about wanting to hit the draft hard. If you could turn pick 9 or whatever pick it is next year, pick 15, 16, 17 next year into pick 16 through 20 this year, I'd probably do it because we've got 16. We've got nothing till 65. We want to inject some youth into this team, keep developing it while it's good. So I don't think the price would be too massive, Pom. And I think it'd be something like that. It'd be a worse pick this year, but only slightly worse.
It'd be interesting because I could see a future first and Zach Fisher with North being linked with him going in for their seconds next year, and Carlton maybe dropping back to 40 and 49 this year with that
something picks. Like that. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And Carlton going, right, let's do it. But be interesting. Is there any way Carlton get Harley Reid? I reckon you've got more chance of me being the opening act of Taylor Swift this year, to be honest. I can't see it. I think it would jeopardize it would jeopardize the Camparellis massively because it would require them. But you want to talk about Harley Reid? We're going to. Melbourne Demons, 4th on the ladder. Carlton knock these cunts out. 5, 13, 25 and 33. We don't often see Melbourne with prime picks in the draft, which suggests they're going to be very active. 3 changes so far, 4 to go. But I think their side needs a lot to keep up to date with modern football, namely point of difference, a forward of note that's not Ben Brown and not Tom McDonald, and some pace to complement their half-forward line. LekDog, tell me about it.
Yeah, so last year they brought in Jed Adams, Kaya Farris-White. They were a little bit hamstrung with what they could do. They brought in Matt Jefferson, which is a developing player, Josh Shackey, which was never going to work, and I would say didn't work. They brought in Lucky Hunter, which served a purpose. Will Verrill, Oliver Seston, Kai Turner, and then the Brodie Grundy trade, which they got him for not much, and they're going to send him out for not much. That was it didn't make sense really at the time, and it still doesn't make sense now. They do need ruck depth, but they don't need 2 starting ruckmen, which is what they had. So Brodie Grundy's on the way out. He will be traded to Sydney. Last year, they lost a few players. Mitch Brown, which you probably didn't look like a loss at the time because it looked like they probably had enough depth key forwards to cover for him, but Mitch Brown played for them. Luke Jackson also went, which was a huge loss. Jaden Hunt went over to West Coast and played pretty well. So they lost a bit. So far this year, they've lost Luke Dunstan to retirement because he did an ACL. Michael Hibbard retired, and they've delisted Deacon Smith out of contract. Andy Manitz, Wakefield, Kai Turner, Jake Melksham, and James Jordan is a free agent. Looks like he's probably going to leave. On my wish list for them, I have a decent key forward. I have a developing ruck and mid/forward depth. So that's someone who can go into the midfield or the forward line. Shane McAdam has requested a trade to Melbourne, so we suspect he'll come across. But for me, there's actually quite a few names on this list for them. They've got picks to go after a young gun, which I think they will, Pom. I'll let you talk about that. They've got 5, 13, 25, 33, and 88. You can talk about what you think they're going to do with that. And then I think around the edges, they'll actually be able to attract decent talent to fill these ruck holes and the key forward role, because they really need to, because you said it, Tom McDonald, Ben Brown, they're not good enough. They had injuries towards the back end of the year. I think they just need someone that can come in and kick goals.
I think it's going to be an interesting one, and we've highlighted some players' experience. I mean, Zach Fisher is a player I put on here that I could see them going as a point of difference if they wanted to, but I do want to talk about what I suspect will happen. And someone asked earlier, I think it was Chills, who said, what's the rumour about Melbourne have been all the talk of the town, right? That they've got something up their sleeve. I actually think the most logical deal that we are going to see this year is Harley Reid. I think they are primed for Harley Reid. And I'm going to give you my POM-based evidence of why. Number one, Riley Sanders. Riley Sanders is not picked 2 or 3 in this draft. He's too early. And if North Melbourne do that, there is an argument they've got picked 3 for free for Ben Mackay. They haven't, in my opinion, because they've lost Ben Mackay. I think 5 and 13, right, with a swap later down the track, would get the job done. Why? 5, Riley Sanders, about his money. Pick 13, it's right in the purview of what they're looking for. A Darcy Wilson, an Ollie Murphy, a Jordan. Ollie Murphy is like a Gibson type player that they would do. I think it would get them Harley Reid, and I think Harley Reid is what Melbourne are missing to go to that next level. I think he is a player that comes in. He's something they haven't got. They have the positions to cover his development. I think Harley Reid, I'm telling you now, Melbourne will hold pick 1 come the draft. That's Pom's big call.
I like it, and he would be a massive coup for them. And that's the gamble you take when you let a Luke Jackson go back to Fremantle. So that's what they're hoping to come out of it. I saw a question about getting rid of a ruck. So Grundy's not going to be at the club next year, which means Max Gawn's their number 1 ruck, and then they don't have a backup one really. They've got like Will Verrill developing. They've got a couple of guys, but they don't actually have a ruck one. So it doesn't need to be someone who can play. So I'm talking like a Sam Hayes or a Bryn Teak or one of those guys that won't be playing at Port Adelaide next year.
Lysett might be a good call.
Lysett's another one. Like if the one thing is they need to be content with probably not playing. Lysett doesn't offer that forward role, which is why I don't love him for the Blues either.
This is a good call as well from Matt.
Oh, I think it's a great call. So if I'm them, these are the forwards I'm looking at. Jeremy Finlayson, Levi Casbolt, Marby Achol, Jack Darling, Chris Burgess, bloody Tim O'Brien, you name it, I'm looking at him. But I think Marby Achol or Jeremy Finlayson, Jack Darling, if they could get it, if they could get that involved, Jack Darling involved in a Harley Reid trade as well, Pom, starting to all add up. Conspiracy theory, it's starting to make sense. I think that would really service them in their premiership run. And then we talked about the mid and forward depth, I think, is important, but not as important because they're going to lose a couple of players. But where they're really lacking right now, and we're talking about pushing for a premiership, key forward who can actually impact games.
Mate, I agree. And I think this is going to be an interesting one because they probably haven't really... They're going to have to give up... Them picks are horrible when you're trading because when you've got a pick and you're Melbourne, everyone's looking at 5. We've seen it at Carlton. When you have that pick, everyone wants it. So that's going to be interesting. Do they get that deal done quickly? 13-5, pick 1 in. They're not going to trade Harley Reid. And then they start working around their future picks, which they've been very successful at. Or do they trade that 5 and 13 down and try and bring some talent in? Mirabello, I like that pick. I can see him being there. I think that's a great selection.
I think so as well. I think it's a great pick for them.
Well, we're nearly at the end of this bumper session. Port Adelaide, these are a team that I think are probably the most intriguing to talk about because I actually think this list has over-excelled when you look at it. Changes 5, 4 to go. Third, absolute dog shit picks to come in. LekDog, why do they have dog shit picks? Tell me what they've done this year. Gone.
Well, I mean, last year they traded for Jason Horne-Francis. Primarily, that's the reason. They gave up a lot to get him. Junior Rioli was another trade they pulled off. And then they tried to work around the edges. They got Barkler, Evans, Kyle Marshall, Tom McCullum, Tom Scully. They got a couple of speculative picks to kind of try and get some development going on in the background. But primarily, they brought in Jason Horne-Francis. And I agree. I definitely think they overachieved. Well, not over... I think they're around the mark of where they should have been, but given the level of talent, when you actually look at it, particularly if you look at their back line, talking about, Aliria, Tom Jonas, who's gone, Trent McKenzie, they don't have a lot there, and they don't have that many real true key position defenders. Given that, and given the availability of their forward line, I think they massively overachieved, and it came off the back of some really dominant midfield performances, some really strong development from Rosie and Butters and guys like that, Willem Drew, Sam Powell-Pepper, who can also impact ahead of the ball. So out of contract, Pom, they've got Orazio Fantasia, Sam Hayes, Scott Lysette, and Travis Boak. I reckon maybe 2 of them come back, Fantasia and Boak. I reckon Hayes and Lysette might be gone. And we know that Jordan Sweet has asked for a trade there. He would be a fantastic acquisition for them, either as a starting ruck or as the next in line behind Scott Lysette. I think he's going to be really solid for them. And Brandon Zerk-Thatcher has requested trade. And so has Asava Radaglia. So they've got 2 key position players requesting trades there, which does start to fill those holes straight away, despite them being quite bad one-on-one defenders. The issue is, how do you do it? Because they've given up their future last year, so they don't have anything to trade this year. How do they get these players in?
It's going to be a really intriguing one because everyone's asking here is like Port Adelaide are about to fall off a cliff. I agree. Could they look at a Liam Ryan type? Like, you can see what they want, but when you've got 38, 44, and 71.
And 3 players already publicly requesting a trade, which means you have to get them there.
Yeah, because, I mean, this is the AFL, remember? Like, no one's going to turn around.
So they're probably going to have to tap into their future again, Pom, this year, which they're probably pushing the pain down the road a bit. But if it keeps them in contention, I get it. How do you get it done? It's going to be really tough. And I've seen rumors that like an Ollie Wines might get traded or whatever. I just don't believe that. I just don't believe it.
We've got to remember that no one does, do they? No club. Like, do you know what I mean? No club is linked with their best player leaving as much as Port Adelaide. Like Ollie Wines, yeah. I think every fucking trade period is leaving. Like
normally,
I reckon, mate. I have heard more rumors about him leaving, right, than I've done draft profiles of fucking Will Brodie. Yeah. And Will Brodie, I'm going to be honest. I'm pretty sure I did that guy every year for 5 years. I'm going to be totally honest. It's going to be interesting what Port do in terms of their picks, really, of how they're going to do it. Because they traded first last year. When was the last time they used a pick, Port Adelaide, first rounder?
That's a good question. One that I don't have in front of me right now.
I'm pretty sure. Did they use it in 2022?
I can vamp if you want while you look that up.
Let's have a look.
Well,
tell us about experienced players they might bring in.
Yeah, so I think they need a ruckman because I don't think Scott Lycett's going to be there. They need key defenders. They've had 2 players asked to go there, so that's solved if you accept that Radical and Brandon Zerk-Thatcher can actually be upgrades, which I'm questionable on. And I think what they lack is surprisingly a dangerous forward. I think they rely on some midfielders providing forward line score involvements and goals. And so what I'd be looking at for them are some established dangerous forwards. I've written down some names here. They're not exciting names. I've written down Sam Wicks, Will Snelling, Tyler Brockman, who I believe is going to go to West Coast. But that ilk of player, someone who can hit the scoreboard, or Liam Ryan, someone suggested before, would be a good suggestion, I'd say. And then for ruckman, Jordan Sweet, I think he's a fantastic get. If for whatever reason that falls over, they could get a Matthew Flynn or a Reece Stanley type player. But I think the names are in place for them. I just don't know how they do it. It's going to have to be future picks again.
Well, I mean, 2021, Josh Sin was their last first.
Yes.
So that means that they're going to have to use their next first rounder 2024, aren't they?
Yeah, it's 2 in a 4-year window, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's what, 2022, 2023, 24. Well, I mean, they could trade out their future next year, and then they're going to have to use the one after.
Yeah, they will. Yeah.
So, but it's that horrible thing, because this is one of the things that no one talks about when you actually look at their list. It is deceptively old, is Port's list. Like, it's the 9th oldest list in the AFL. And that always shocks you because you don't think it, because you think Rosie, Dersma, Butters, they had that massive crack at the draft. It's actually one of the oldest lists in the AFL.
Yeah, and it'll come down slightly. They've delisted Bonner, they've delisted Dumont, they've retired Jonas, but yeah, like Boak still on the list, 35, Dixon 33, McKenzie 32 and undersized, Lysette 31, Tom Cleary's 30, Alira will be 30 next year, Oliver will be 29 turning 30 next year. It's not a young list, and because they've been so active in the trade period trying to bring in more mature bodies and more experienced players, they have missed out on a fair bit of young draftees and development. I guess the upside for them is they did bring in a Jason Horns-Francis. They do have a Josh Sin on their list. They do have Ollie Lord, who's been solid. Mitch Georgiades, when he comes back from injury, will be all right. They've got some young guys, but the worry for me would be they're going to push it forward again. They're going to sell the future again to get in some established players. When Tassie come, this is another drop-off team that you don't want to be dropping off at the time that Tassie come into the league. So that would be my fear as a Port Adelaide fan.
My fear is I don't think I think their list was exposed quite quickly last year towards the end. And I fear BZT, Sweet, Ratikalia, that's probably first and second gone next year. Probably 38 gone this year as well, right?
Probably,
Ashton Moore is the kid I've got coming in. 2 years without any 18-year-olds, that drop-off could be really deep.
It could. And they're gonna try and hit guys mid-season. Quenton Narkle, they're gonna try and get your delisted free agents. Francis Evans, they're gonna try and do it that way. But I'm with you. I think Michael Voss has won as many finals as Hinkley has as head coach in the last 10 years or whatever that stat was. So watch this space.
The rumours are oxygen tanks on the bench to keep the old guys going. It could be that case, but Brisbane Lions up next. They finally broken through to a grand final, the 8th and the 3rd oldest list in the AFL. But they have got 7 contracts in the air, all incidentally old players, and they've lost some older players already. They finished 2nd at worst for the year, 27, 46, 56, 62. But there is some areas. Key defensive position is probably one that, to complement Harris Andrews, as they saw incidentally against Carlton, Darcy Gardner got away with it, but doing that for 23 games, you are going to get found out, and it has been found out throughout the year. And I think they need a pacey halfback. Losing Rich, they don't really want to use Caden Coleman and Co for long term there. They've got better positions to play. Probably looking for them replacements now. They've got the mid-age players, them older players, probably looking for them development players while they service their peak. LekDog, tell me about the Lions.
Yeah, I hate these pricks because I really like their list. Will Ashcroft last year, dominant, now out for next year. That sucks. The other Ashcroft is coming through next year, I believe. So they'll have some more talent to inject into that team. Bought in Shadow Brain. They bought in Josh Dunkley, huge tick there. Jasper Fletcher, another father-son, and he showed some really solid signs towards the end of the year. Jack Gunson hasn't quite worked out, but he's dangerous on his day. Dara Joyce have just extended. McDonald White, Connor McKenna, who's just signed as well, was a great signing. They have topped up. They're lucky that they had a couple of really solid father-sons they could eject into this team to balance the experience they brought in last year, and they didn't lose much last year. It's like Tom Berry, Dan McStay, Mitch Robinson were the players that were close to their best 22. So far, Daniel Rich and Marcus Adams have retired and out of contract. Blake Coleman, McDonald White, Dane Zorko, Devon Robertson, who I believe will probably get traded back to WA, Nakai Cockatoo, Reese Matheson, who I think has something to give at AFL, but not at Brisbane, and Tom Fullerton. I think, their number one concern, and if they've got money to do it, is key defender. And I think that's easy. You've nailed it there. Lewis Melican, Caleb Marchbank, Tom Duday. It's that type of player. If they can get one of them in to come and do a job, they're laughing. They'll be contending again for a while. And I think if they can find another young player with pace, it wouldn't hurt to inject it into their side. But when I build out their depth list, their depth charts, it's just, they're pretty stacked across the board, these guys, and it's really bloody frustrating.
I think by far the best list in the AFL. Like, if you actually look at like depth and you look at 1 to 46, solid. And this is my complaint about the Northern States having their academies. Do you know what I mean? Jasper Fletcher, I covered him last year. No one talked about him. Literally an absolute supreme beast. An absolute supreme beast. Like, very good player. Will go higher when you redraft that. Will Ashcroft, should a final side have access to a top 3 player? Probably not, if you're really about equalisation. And like you say, probably the best needs here, it's just depth. It's just, they don't have to have someone to play now. They need someone, though, in that backup, because if you do get injuries, which Brisbane haven't had, that'll start to add up. And like we say, I mean, the guy that I look at in the draft, they've got some really good picks, as well, it has to be said, for a team that has finished so high up and acquired the players it's acquired in the last 2 years. But they're in a real good position. Lunaman Lawal, I think he's absolutely a perfect acquisition for them. He is like a little baby version of Daniel Rich, but with that Adam Sard flair and zip and go. They've got the players to really let him develop in the VFL and come on in 2-3 years. Then you look deeper down. If they are looking at key forward and key position depth, you've got players like Zane Tarkowski, Taylor Good, Heath Ollington, players like that are probably 2-3 years ago away. But they don't need them to play now. They need them to play in 2 or 3 years' time, and they rely on their great system. And I think they're in a great position, Brisbane. Great position.
Yeah, no, they are. They've been really lucky. They've been able to inject a couple of players for free while also giving away their best picks for talented players. They've really timed their run. It took them 5 or so cracks to get into a grand final over the journey of their rebuild, and they've done it this week, and they'll put up a good fight. And we're going to speak about Collingwood in a second, who are in a similar place because of similar access to players. So, massive kudos to Brisbane. Very annoying, very frustrating.
It is, and it's interesting. Do you know what I mean? Carlton are exactly 1 year. 1 year. If you look at games played and stuff behind their list makeup. So, be a very interesting wait and see from Carlton to see if they can replicate it. Two teams that have been heavily linked in the history. So, it's going to be very interesting. But, do you know what I mean? Solid list from back to front, and pretty good when you're only being told that you need depth players, not best 22. And then we come to the minor premiers, the guys that will be looking to stop the Brisbane train this weekend. And Collingwood with 18, 36 and 75. First, no list changes as you would expect when you're playing a granny, unless you get a retirement. 8 contracts up in the air. Again, probably every year we say this key pillar depth is probably what they're looking for, and probably depth projects like it. Very interesting makeup when you look at Collingwood. For the fourth oldest list, the largest disparity between babies and old players. So they have a plethora of them 28s and overs. Not much in the middle, then a lot of young players. So you can see where Collingwood are going with their list management in the terms of they've got their backups in 2 years, 3 years, probably just looking for them things to tide you over.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe they could work on some forward line depth just across the board, both key and general. And that's just looking at a Jamie Allard who's a bit older, but broadly just in a really, really good spot. Still getting good footy out of Steele Sidebottom and Scott Pendlebury. There are a few players that are older and might drop off, but broadly I really like this list. I mean, it's similar to a lot of these teams we've spoken about. There seems to be a real dearth of key defenders. I think they could afford to get one. They've got more. Howe, Charlie Dean's never available, Frampton, Kelly. They've got names, but you wouldn't mind a project to develop there. Same for key forwards. Who have they got? McStay, Myercheck, Ashley Johnson. You probably want someone to develop there. We've talked about Will Gould, Buku Khamis. They've talked about publicly. They're in a really good spot. Last year, they brought in Billy Frampton, Bobby Hill, and Tom Mitchell, and Dan McStay, who have all filled roles for them this year, which has been really good. They didn't lose heaps last year outside of Brodie Grundy, and they probably now lack a little bit of depth in that ruck department, which is why they're looking at a Todd Goldstein as a coach / backup in case something happens to Darcy Cameron. But yeah, broadly in a really good position. Out of contract, Aidan Begg, Arlo Draper, Cooper Murley, Josh Carmichael, Tom Wilson, Trent Bianco, Trey Rusco, and Will Kelly. And pretty much everyone except Will Kelly, like if they left the club, you wouldn't stress too much about it if you're a Collingwood fan. So again, very annoying, but there's a reason that they're at the top of the ladder.
There is, do you know what I mean? Dr. Doofenshmirtz, it's the depth. I agree with Peter V, what he's saying. They're looking for them. They've got that gap of younger players, and it's worth noting they're younger players that you haven't even seen yet. Ed Allen, do you know what I mean? He's a big bull type player, so always takes 2 years. So they've got them players probably in reserve. I remember saying 2 and a bit years ago when they did that massive trade of jettison ship players, and everyone complained. Most of the AFL media said they were suicidal. I was like, this will pay them back very quickly. This is something that I think the Dogs need to do. Go, right, I have got a load of players here that I can blag sides who are 4th to 8th, that they will suddenly make them a top 4 side, and then fuck them off for first and go young very quickly. That's why Collingwood have got that depth of real loads of 18, 19, 20-year-olds you haven't seen, all being prepared. So effectively, while they've had a best 22, these guys can hide away and play state-level football, which I think is going to be the model of a lot of good sides. And I expect your Carltons and your Melbournes to mirror Collingwood in the coming years of not clinging on to their window, getting rid of them now, taking your medicine for a year, and then being ready to go. What they're going to do, though, is interesting. Will Gould was a guy that I picked out who I think really suits what Collingwood have done with players like Roughhead and stuff like that. I think that's been a very smart decision of players maybe not getting the opportunity and keeping the model. Archie Roberts, for me, is something that when I looked at, absolutely what Collingwood would probably be looking at. An incredible leader of men. Allows Quaynor to get that midfield time that Fly has been talking about. They seem to like to hide a player off halfback as he learns his role. Very strong wingman as well in his own right. Has scope for inside. They may look at my favourite, other than Colston as well, Harry Di Matteo, who is an incredibly gifted little footballer as well. Real quick feet, quick skills. And then they may go with a key forward project in Logan Morris, who, in my opinion, Logan Morris might be the best key forward in this draft who is ready for AFL football, aside from Nate Caddy. Modern day player, incredibly mobile, and that kind of suits the Collingwood mob. They don't really care about having a 200-centimetre forward. They seem to play that very mobile game. So I think it suits. It's going to be a very interesting trade period here, because I could see them trading that pick 18 to go down a bit.
Yeah, which I would hate to see, but they've got the liberty of being able to be a bit flexible and make some bold calls at the trade table. I don't think there'll be any massive names come in, but it just seems to be for them that when they do bring in a name, they find a role for them and they succeed in that role. So I hate these pricks and I don't like talking about them.
Mate, I'm with you. It's the job we do, though. We talk about them. I mean, Goldstein is that guy who's coming in, and like we said, Goldstein, it suits the bill, doesn't it? It suits what Collingwood have done. Brought in a player that's probably not appreciated by another side, or to help aid development. Someone like Tom Mitchell, no surprise they've got better around the clearance. But again, look at who he's teaching. If you're an Ed Allen, you're a midfielder there, you might as well learn off the best player to do it. And that's the privilege that we have as a Carlton Football Club as well, that we've got them type of players in our system that you can learn off as they get older. So going to be really interesting what Collingwood do, because I think they've got a real exciting little window here of what they can do. There's so much they can do. They've got that pick where they can do so much with it if they want to.
They can take it. They can trade it. They can use a combination of future picks to trade down and get a really solid player. Like, yeah, very frustrating. Very frustrating. Good on them.
Fuck them. All right. But chat, I've really enjoyed it. As always, it's a privilege doing this. We'll be back probably later on in the week if LekDog's free, and we'll start going through all these trade rumours. And what I thought we'd do this week is actually do a likelihood. We'll have a POM LekDog-ometer of bullshit or real. And
I like it.
There's already, because we know we're 4 days away from one of them dickheads on Trade Radio doing an 18-team trade.
I'm already upset about it. I'm already pissed off about it.
I can't wait. I can't wait to see that trade. Usually by the worst Brownlow player ever, he does a trade where the scenario effectively is 17 teams pay for Melbourne to have Harley Reid.
Oh, God. I hate it.
Can't wait to have a big fucking thing up. But cheers, guys. Big 2 hour stream. We love you. See you next week.